Liam had lost his son, Max. The farewell at the wake was one of the hardest moments he had ever faced. Max was only 11, full of life and curiosity, the kind of child who brought light into every room he entered. But now, that light was gone, and Liam's world felt unbearably dark. Despite the finality of death, something inside Liam couldn't fully accept his son's sudden passing. It gnawed at him, a strange, unshakable feeling that there was more to Max's death than what appeared. Overcome with grief and uncertainty, Liam made a decision that many would find unusual, even unthinkable. He placed a small, hidden camera inside Max's coffin before the burial. Perhaps it was a way for him to cling to the last connection with his son, or maybe it was the desperate attempt of a father who couldn't let go. Either way, the act was born from a place of deep love and heartbreak. That night, Liam sat alone in his dimly lit living room. The house was eerily quiet, every corner a painful reminder of Max's absence. The monitor connected to the hidden camera displayed nothing but darkness, a still and lifeless image from inside the coffin. Liam stared at it for hours, hoping for something. But there was only silence, an oppressive void that mirrored the emptiness in his heart. Exhausted, he finally drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, Liam woke up to a house still filled with the weight of loss. He busied himself with small tasks, trying to distract his mind from the crushing grief. For a moment, he had almost forgotten about the camera. But when he remembered, a pang of curiosity and dread pushed him toward the monitor. He turned it on, expecting to see the same lifeless scene. Instead, his blood ran cold. In the still image of the coffin, something moved. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint shift, like a shadow flickering across the screen. Liam leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. Then came the sound, low, faint, but unmistakable. Breathing. A slow, rhythmic pattern, as if someone were alive inside the coffin. "This can't be real," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the screen, unable to look away. The logical part of his mind screamed that it had to be a technical glitch, interference, or a malfunction, but the sound was too clear, too real. And then, for the briefest of moments, he thought he saw movement again, this time more distinct, as if a hand had twitched ever so slightly. Panic took over. Liam grabbed his phone and called his sister Emily. She had been his anchor throughout this ordeal, the only person who truly understood the depth of his pain. "Emily," he said, his voice frantic, "you need to come over. Now it's about Max. There's something happening. I can't explain it, but you have to see it." Emily, though skeptical, could hear the desperation in her brother's voice. She tried to reason with him, suggesting that grief was clouding his judgment. But Liam's urgency was undeniable. Within 20 minutes she arrived at his home. He met her at the door, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. Without a word, Liam led her to the monitor. Emily hesitated as she stared at the screen, seeing nothing but darkness. "Liam," she began gently, "I know you're hurting, but—" Before she could finish, the sound started again. The faint, rhythmic breathing filled the room, sending chills down Emily's spine. Her hand flew to her mouth as her eyes darted between Liam and the screen. Then it happened. The movement. A subtle but clear shift in the stillness of the coffin. What is this?" Emily stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to Liam, who looked just as terrified. "This isn't possible. He's gone, Liam. We were at the funeral. We saw him. I don't know," Liam replied, his voice breaking. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing." Without hesitation, Liam grabbed his car keys. "I'm going to the cemetery," he said firmly. Emily tried to stop him, pleading with him to think rationally. But the look in his eyes told her there was no changing his mind. With a heavy sigh, she relented, following him to the car. The drive to the cemetery was tense and silent, both of them lost in their thoughts. Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. Could it be real? And if it was, what did it mean? When they arrived at the cemetery, the night was cloaked in an eerie stillness. The full moon cast an ethereal glow over the gravestones, and a cold breeze whispered through the trees. Liam didn't wait. He grabbed a shovel from the trunk and marched toward Max's grave with a determination that bordered on desperation. Emily followed reluctantly, her heart pounding with every step. As Liam began digging, the sound of the shovel cutting through the earth echoed in the quiet cemetery. Emily stood by, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, glancing nervously around as if expecting something or someone to appear. "Liam," she whispered, "are you sure about this? What if we're making a mistake?" Liam didn't answer. He kept digging, his movements frantic, his breathing heavy. Sweat dripped down his face despite the chill in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shovel struck wood. Both siblings froze. The wooden lid of Max's coffin lay before them, buried beneath a thin layer of earth. Liam took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he reached down to open the coffin. Liam's hands trembled as he gripped the edges of the coffin lid. Emily, standing just behind him, clutched her scarf tightly, her breath visible in the cold night air. The world seemed to hold its breath with them as Liam, with every ounce of strength and resolve he could muster, pried the lid open. The hinges groaned, and for a moment the sound of the lid creaking drowned out the deafening pounding of Liam's heart. When the lid finally swung open, both siblings froze, their eyes locked on what lay inside. Max's body was there, just as they had seen him during the funeral. Serene, still, and pale. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air carried an unnatural chill that made Emily shiver. Liam leaned in closer, his face mere inches from his son's lifeless form. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Max, I'm here. I'm here, buddy." Then it happened. Max's lips moved, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch that sent a jolt of electricity through Liam's body. Emily gasped, taking a step back as her hands flew to her mouth. "Liam, did you see that? Did you see him move?" Before Liam could respond, a faint exhalation escaped from Max's lips. It wasn't the soft breath of a sleeping child, but something different. It was cold, mechanical, and unnervingly hollow, as though the air carried more than just life. It carried something unnatural. Then Max's eyes opened. They weren't the warm, bright eyes Liam remembered. These were lifeless, devoid of any recognition, entirely blank. "Dad." The word came out in a whisper, but the voice didn't belong to Max. It was deeper, layered, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. The sound reverberated through Liam's chest, making him stumble backward in shock. Emily screamed, her knees nearly giving out. "That's not Max!" she cried, pointing at the body in the coffin. "Liam, that's not your son." But Liam couldn't move. He was paralyzed, torn between his love for Max and the overwhelming fear that something else was inhabiting his child's body. "Max, it's me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's Dad. I'm here to help you." Max's head slowly turned toward Liam, the movement unnatural and stiff, like a marionette being manipulated by invisible strings. "You shouldn't have come," the voice said, resonating with an ominous finality. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, colder, suffocating. Emily clung to Liam's arm, her body trembling. "Liam, we need to leave, now." But Liam couldn't look away. His mind refused to accept what he was seeing. This was his son, his Max. He had to believe there was still a way to save him, to bring him back. "Max," he said again, louder this time, his desperation cutting through the thick air. "I'm not leaving you. Whatever's happening, I'm here." Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A low, guttural sound emanated from the coffin, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't just coming from Max. It was coming from the earth itself, a deep, unholy rumble that seemed to echo from the depths of the cemetery. Emily screamed again, pulling at Liam's arm. "Liam, please! We need to go!" Before Liam could respond, Max's hand shot up, grabbing his father's wrist with an iron grip. Liam gasped in pain, trying to pull away, but Max's strength was inhuman. His blank eyes bore into Liam's, and for a brief moment, Liam thought he saw something ancient, dark, and deeply malevolent, staring back at him. "You shouldn't have disturbed me," the voice growled, no longer pretending to be Max's. "You've opened the door, and now you'll pay the price." The coffin began to shake violently, and a dark shadowy mist began to seep out from beneath Max's body. It swirled around them, wrapping the grave in an unnatural fog that carried with it an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily yanked on Liam's arm with all her strength, finally breaking him free from Max's grip. "We have to go," she screamed, pulling him away from the grave. Liam stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror as he watched the mist rise, taking on a shape that was neither human nor animal, but something incomprehensibly twisted. The shadowy figure hovered above the grave, its glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. It let out a deafening roar that echoed through the cemetery, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "Run!" Emily shouted, dragging Liam toward the car. The two of them sprinted through the cemetery, the shadowy figure looming behind them, its presence pressing down on them like a physical weight. The cold air burned their lungs as they ran, the sound of their frantic footsteps mingling with the otherworldly growls that seemed to follow them. When they finally reached the car, Emily fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She threw the door open, and both of them scrambled inside. The engine roared to life, and Liam floored the gas pedal, speeding away from the cemetery as the shadowy figure loomed in the rearview mirror. As they drove into the night, neither of them spoke, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The terror of what they had seen clung to them like a shadow, and both knew that their lives would never be the same. The car sped down the dark, empty road, the weight of the night's events bearing down on Liam and Emily. The only sound inside the vehicle was their labored breathing, each of them trying to process the terror they had just escaped. Emily clutched the dashboard, her eyes wide with panic as she finally broke the silence. What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Liam, that wasn't Max. That wasn't him." Liam's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind raced, filled with images of Max's lifeless body, the blank stare, and the shadowy figure that had risen from the grave. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice hollow. "But whatever it wasn't my son." Emily turned to him, her fear replaced by determination. "We need help, Liam. This isn't something we can handle on our own. We have to find someone who knows what this is, someone who can help us put Max to rest." Liam nodded, his heart heavy with the realization that he couldn't fix this alone. "Father Gabriel," he said after a moment of silence. "The priest from the old church on the hill. He might know what to do." Emily hesitated, unsure of whether a priest would truly be able to help with something so unexplainable, but she didn't argue. They had no other options. "Let's go," she said quietly. They drove through the narrow, winding roads of the village until they reached the church. The building loomed in the distance, its steeple barely visible against the dark sky. The headlights illuminated the cobblestone path leading up to the entrance, and the two siblings stepped out of the car, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Liam pounded on the heavy wooden door, his desperation evident. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Father Gabriel, an older man with kind but piercing eyes. He studied the two of them with concern, noting their pale faces and trembling hands. "What brings you here at this hour?" he asked, his deep voice calm but laced with curiosity. "Father, we need your help," Liam began, his voice breaking. "It's about my son, Max. Something's happened. Something we can't explain." Father Gabriel's brow furrowed and he stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "Come in. Tell me everything." Inside the church, the air was cool and filled with the faint scent of incense. Liam and Emily sat on one of the wooden pews, recounting the events of the night in halting, trembling voices. They spoke of the camera, the breathing, the grave, and the shadowy figure that had risen from the coffin. As they spoke, Father Gabriel listened intently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When they finished, the priest stood and walked to a small table at the front of the church. He retrieved a large weathered book, its leather cover worn and cracked with age. "What you're describing," he said slowly, "is not unheard of, though it is rare. There are forces in this world, dark, ancient forces, that sometimes attach themselves to the living or the dead. They feed on grief, on despair, and on the desperation of those left behind." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. "What can we do?" he asked. "How do we stop it? How do we free Max from whatever this is? Father Gabriel turned to face them, his expression grave. We must perform a ritual to sever the connection between your son's body and this entity. It is dangerous and it will require your strength and faith. Are you prepared for this? Liam nodded without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes. Emily, though terrified, also agreed. We just want him to be at peace. Father Gabriel began gathering what he needed for the ritual: candles, holy water, a crucifix, and the ancient book filled with sacred prayers. He explained that they would need to return to the cemetery at dawn, when the boundary between the physical world and the spiritual realm was weakest. Until then, he urged them to rest and prepare themselves mentally for what lay ahead. The hours passed slowly. Liam and Emily sat in the church, their nerves raw, unable to sleep. As the first light of dawn broke through the stained glass windows, Father Gabriel called them to the altar. "It is time," he said. "Let us go." The three of them made their way back to the cemetery, the rising sun casting a faint glow over the gravestones. The air was heavy with anticipation, and every step felt like a step closer to the unknown. When they reached Max's grave, the disturbed earth from the night before was still fresh, a stark reminder of what they had unleashed. Father Gabriel placed the candles in a circle around the grave, lighting each one carefully. He sprinkled holy water over the soil and held the crucifix high. "Do not leave the circle," he warned. "No matter what happens, stay inside." Liam and Emily stood together, their hands tightly clasped as the priest began the ritual. His voice was steady and powerful, reciting the ancient prayers in Latin. The air grew colder with each word, and a strange, unnatural wind began to swirl around them. The candles flickered but did not go out. Then the ground began to tremble. The same low, guttural sound from the night before echoed through the cemetery, growing louder and more intense. The soil over the coffin shifted, and the shadowy mist began to rise once more. Liam felt his heart race as the dark figure took shape, its glowing eyes fixing on him with an intensity that made his blood run cold. "You cannot stop me," the entity growled, its voice a deep, resonating chorus. "You invited me here. You gave me the opening." Father Gabriel didn't falter. He continued the prayers, his voice rising above the howling wind. The shadowy figure writhed and twisted, its form growing unstable as if the ritual was weakening it. The priest splashed more holy water toward the grave, the droplets sizzling as they hit the mist. The entity let out a deafening roar, lunging toward the circle. Liam and Emily braced themselves, but the invisible barrier created by the ritual held firm. The shadow collided with the edge of the circle and recoiled, screaming in rage. "Keep going," Liam shouted, his voice shaking but filled with determination. Father Gabriel's prayers reached their climax, his words ringing out with unshakable conviction. The shadow writhed one last time before letting out a final piercing scream. Its form shattered into fragments of darkness that dissolved into the earth, leaving behind an eerie silence. As the sun fully rose, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The air felt lighter, the cemetery once again peaceful. Father Gabriel lowered the crucifix, his hands trembling slightly from the effort. "It is done," he said quietly. "Max's body is free. The darkness is gone." Liam collapsed to his knees beside Max's grave, overwhelmed by a mix of exhaustion and grief. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at the freshly disturbed earth. Despite the terror of the night and the dark presence they had faced, one truth now brought him a sliver of comfort. Max was finally free. He no longer had to endure whatever horrifying connection had ensnared him in the first place. Emily knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around her brother as her own tears fell. "He's at peace now, Liam," she whispered softly. "We did what we had to do. Max is finally resting." Father Gabriel placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. His face, though weathered and calm, showed the strain of what they had just endured. "You showed incredible courage," he said, "and your love for your son gave you the strength to face this darkness. But now you must let him go. The bond is broken. He is with the light." Liam nodded, though the words felt heavy in his chest. Letting go of Max even now felt impossible. But deep down he knew Father Gabriel was right. The ritual had done what it was meant to do. Max was no longer trapped, and Liam had to accept that his son was truly gone. The three of them stood in silence for a long time, the early morning sun casting soft golden light over the cemetery. The stillness was almost surreal after the chaos of the night, as if the world itself were mourning with Liam while offering him a chance to heal. Finally, Father Gabriel spoke. "You should both go home and rest. What happened here tonight will take time to process, but know that you did the right thing." Liam turned to the priest, gratitude shining in his tear-filled eyes. "Thank you, Father. I don't know how to repay you." "You owe me nothing," Gabriel replied gently. "Your son's memory is the only thanks I need. Hold on to the love you shared with him. That is what will give you strength." Liam and Emily left the cemetery, walking slowly toward their car. As they reached the gates, Liam turned back for one final look at Max's grave. The candles had burned out and the ground looked undisturbed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Liam knew the truth. He would carry the memory of that night with him forever. The drive home was quiet, both siblings lost in their thoughts. Liam felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The weight of his grief now mingled with the knowledge that Max was free from whatever dark force had claimed him. Emily, too, struggled to process everything they had seen and experienced. The image of Max's blank eyes and the shadowy figure would haunt her for a long time. When they reached Liam's house, he stepped inside and was immediately struck by the quiet emptiness. The toys Max used to play with still sat in the corner of the living room, and his drawings still adorned the fridge. It was a painful reminder of what had been lost. But for the first time since Max's passing, Liam felt a sense of closure. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Liam packed away Max's belongings, preserving the memories while creating space to heal. Emily visited often, offering her support as they both navigated the aftermath of that harrowing night. Father Gabriel checked in regularly, ensuring that the family felt safe and at peace. One day, while sorting through a box of Max's old schoolwork, Liam found something that stopped him in his tracks. It was a drawing, one he hadn't seen before. In it, Max had drawn himself and Liam standing under a tree holding hands. Above them, the sun shone brightly, and in the corner, Max had written in his shaky handwriting, "Forever, Dad." Liam's breath caught in his throat as he held the drawing close to his chest. Tears welled in his eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of love, of a bond that even death couldn't break. From that day on, Liam carried the drawing with him everywhere, a reminder that Max's love was eternal. Though the pain of losing his son would never fully fade, Liam found solace in knowing that Max was at peace, and that the memories they shared would always live on in his heart.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.